All right, welcome back, Hawks. In this video, we're going to talk about some basic dimensioning and how to print. So on your first drawing, I'm asking you, or on this drawing, I'm asking you to replicate this inlaid linoleum drawing. Okay, so that should look familiar. We've asked you to do it on the board. Now we went over a previous video where we talked about some of the techniques, some of the skills, so like drawing lines, trimming lines, racing lines, changing layers. And you can see here that I've got all of the geometry here, and now we're talking about needing to dimension this. On this particular object, a good rule of thumb would be to effectively dimension it just like we saw in the example, okay? When we go to dimension, we've talked about layers before. All of my object lines are on the OBJ layer. And for dimensioning, we're going to put those on the dimension layer. So I'm going to make that layer active. The thing about layers is I can change all of these layers whenever I want, put them on whatever layer I want. You can see here, when I put it on the center layer, it gets center lines. And I put it on the hidden layer, it gets hidden lines. We want to do the dimension layer, but we want these object layers to be, or sorry, the object lines to be on the object layer. I'm going to set this up so any of the dimensions that I draw will be on the dimension layer. Okay, let's start up in the top left-hand corner here. And again, some students will want to use this big dimension button. I generally think it's got too many options. It can actually become kind of confusing. So I would suggest that you use this linear one. You'll see there's a drop down there for a number of different types. We're going to be doing linear dimensions on this particular drawing. So I'm going to grab a linear dimension, and you can see in it that the command window, the command prompt says, well, where's the first extension line going to go? Well, I'm going to start it over here on the left. Okay, so I left clicked there, and it says, now where is the second extension line? Well, I want to dimension this distance here. So I'm going to left click there, and it's already attempting to draw a dimension for me. One of the things when we were doing board drawing is we had to kind of think about the spacing here. And we would want to do the same thing here. If I was to zoom out, we wouldn't want this dimension to be way out here, okay? We also wouldn't want the same dimension to be very, very close, like this, okay? So neither of those are good. We want to be kind of somewhere in between. So my suggestion would be to, again, you see that object snap is kind of deciding or helping me find those exact corners. If I don't have that object snap on, let's demonstrate that. Okay, so object snap we have down here. We have object snap tracking. Sorry, object snap tracking. That when I go to put the dimension in, see it's picking that corner up way out here. That can sometimes be annoying. So if I turn off F11, okay, see how I have to get much closer. So you might want to turn that object snap tracking off, okay? And I can do that again with F11 or clicking. But this is the object snap. If you don't have object snap on, you're guessing where the corner is. And, oh, it's from there to there. And you can see that is not the dimension that I want, okay? AutoCAD is going to give you the exact size of whatever it is that you're drawing, okay? So F3 will turn object snap back on. And if I do that dimension now with the help, I will get the much more accurate dimension. Okay, so again, F11, your object snap tracking, you may or may not want to have that on. It can become problematic. But we can turn both of those off with either F11 or F3. So when it comes to the dimension itself, the spacing, I kind of like to do an eyeball. And this will come with a little practice. Depending on the size of the object you're drawing. I'm thinking that kind of like right about there is probably the actual distance that I want to have the dimension away. So let me delete that really close one, and we'll delete this really tall one. And that's kind of what I'm looking to see. That looks pretty good to me. I would say that's probably like a quarter to a half an inch, okay? We might be able to actually just try to do a dimension between here. Look at that, 0.27. So my eyeball is apparently working okay right there, somewhere in between there, okay? If we're farther away, it might look a little odd. If we're closer, it might be too close. So that's a good distance for our first dimension to be away. Now, we need to continue our way across. Now, we want to continue a linear dimension, and I'm going to start where I stop. Okay, I need to do the gap here. So from one side of the gap to the other side. And now here is where there's a technique, okay? Some people might just want to try to eyeball this and getting it where you think it needs to be. The easy solution here is you go over here to the end point of the arrow of the previous dimension, and I'm going to left click, and that's going to guarantee that those dimensions are perfectly aligned. And we generally want to have, if there's a line of dimensions here, they're all supposed to be the same distance away. We want them to be all the same distance away. So that's a good technique. And let's just continue down the line here, getting that linear dimension. Okay, you can see here I'm grabbing the end point of that arrow. I can certainly come to the front and left click, right? I would have to look and see. I think we have one more dimension here for this gap. Okay, and again, I want to use the end point so I can, again, zoom in or zoom out with the scroll button on my mouse, and I need those dimensions. Okay. The other dimension that I need up on the top edge here is the overall distance of this entire object. You notice we didn't dimension this line. If we dimension that line, we'll have to add all those up to find out what the overall dimension is. You'll also notice that we kind of dimension from left to right. So we kind of dimension like we read when possible. For the overall dimension, I'm going to go right above this already existing line of dimensions. So from one edge to the other, left click. And again, I'm going to eyeball this. This would be too close. This would be too far. I want it either similar to the distance that we currently have here, or maybe slightly closer. I think that's probably looking okay. So I'm going to left click to place that dimension and hit escape. Escape will cancel any command. If you're finding something doesn't work the way you want it to, try hitting escape a couple times and it'll cancel what you're doing. Okay, I'm going to quick save that because I got some work done. And then let's talk about this. You may remember from a previous discussion on dimensioning that we don't generally want to stack dimensions like this if we can avoid it. So once we've drawn a dimension, we can click on that dimension. You'll see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every dimension will have 5 grips. Okay, so let's look at that. The first 2 closest grips would allow me to change the placement of those end points for the extension lines. Okay, the second set of grips up near the arrows will allow me to extend the dimension, and the center one would allow me to move the text. Okay, so I can move the text. So for this 8-inch dimension, I'm going to want to maybe slide it over slightly. So it's, see, and this is where object snap. So I'm going to turn off F3 and move it slightly over. Okay, because that object snap was trying to put me back where I was. So I'll turn object snap back on with my F3 key, and you can kind of see it's going on up here. I'm just not using the button down here. Okay, so F3 is object snap. F8 is that ortho. Okay, so I got those dimensions up across the top. Now we've got some dimensions to do on the side. So let's go again and get that linear dimension. And in the example, they start up at the same top corner. You'll notice that our dimension, it automatically is kind of leaving a gap here from the object. And we do want to see that. It's predetermined setting in this template file. Okay, again, I should see a gap there. I don't, and this does happen sometimes. Some people will do this. Okay, so first off, we've got the extension line on top of an object line. Okay, but more importantly, we don't see that gap. Okay, so it is kind of important that you pay attention to the settings. So I'm gonna go from that corner down, and again, I now have to kind of reestablish my spacing. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball, and that kind of looks about the same distance. Again, distance from the dimension line to the object, from the dimension line to the object. Let's do a quick dimension. Let's see how I did. Okay, it's a little bit bigger, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. It looks okay to my eye. Okay, they do not have to be perfect, but 0.27 or whatever it was, and 0.3, that's pretty darn close. Okay, in the grand scheme of things. And like we did across the top, we're now going to continue down with the linear dimension. So we'll do this gap, and we'll attach it to the end point of that arrow. We'll do another one. By the way, if you hit Enter on your keyboard, AutoCAD will redo the last command. So I don't always have to go back up here to the linear one. If I'm still doing dimensioning, I can simply hit Enter, and it'll go back to the last command that I was working with. Okay, so we'll work our way down, and like we did up above, we do not leave that last dimension. We're going to do an overall. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, maybe right about there. And I'm going to slightly shift, turn off F3, slightly shift that text away so we don't have those alignment issues. Okay. Last but not least, we've got a couple dimensions on the inside here and then on the inside here as well. Okay, so I believe we need a dimension. Oh, I gotta turn my object snap back on. We've got a dimension from here to here, and we've got a dimension somewhere here for the 1 inch spacing there. And then I have another dimension here, and I want to align those so we get the space of the gap on the inside. And one more, or I should say two more, we have the very important dimension. This is where most people struggle with this drawing, is they don't have that correct 5/8 of an inch line there. And then some people then don't continue to make sure they have a 1/2 inch gap here. Okay, now we got a little interesting thing going on here. This 625 and this 0.5, we got these arrows. Sometimes AutoCAD will let you kind of move these things around, and you'll see here, it let me kind of replace that dimension with those arrows, and it doesn't, well, yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to let me do it with the 0.5, okay? But you can always give that a whirl. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. Another option would be to kind of, let's get that dimension again. You see how I kind of drag that up, and it's kind of trying to do some different alternatives for me, but I'm okay with the way that looks. And that, Hawks, would be our finished inlaid linoleum drawing with full dimensions. Okay, so if you've been able to follow along, make sure you do a save now. And now we get to go talk about how to print. So we've been in model space, and that's in the tab in the bottom left-hand corner. We're now going to go over to an A size. A size piece of paper is an 8.5 by 11. It's a letter size piece of paper. So let's go ahead and click on that. And there's a couple things in here that we have to talk about. Okay, the default setting, you'll see down here where it says paper, is we are looking at this like we're going to zoom in and out with a camera at an actual piece of paper. Okay, so if you zoom in and zoom out here, that's going to be in paper spacing. You see it says paper down here kind of towards the bottom right. You notice it says model. If I click on paper, things down here change. Now you'll see this kind of green rectangle has become kind of bold and visible. If I click on model, that green rectangle changes. Okay, so what happens when we go into model space, okay, from paper, this is now like we're looking through a viewfinder on our camera where we can pan around and change what we're seeing. We can zoom what we want to see, okay? And most importantly, because this is technical drawing, we might want to create a scale. We drew this at full size. Not everything is going to fit at full size on this piece of paper. So our next step is to determine what scale we're going to print this at. Down here in the bottom right, you'll see I currently have a decimal point. If I zoom in or zoom out, that number is changing. If I click on that number, this is where we can adjust for scale. Okay, I'm going to try to scale this at 1:1. So that would be full size. I'm going to hit that. And that looks like that will fit just perfect here, okay? Now, it is not centered top to bottom and left to right. So what I'm now going to do, and you have to do this very carefully, Hawks, I'm going to, you notice down here. Oh, I'm sorry, it was kind of hard to see there. It says 1:1 currently, okay? You have to very carefully, when we want to kind of center something, you're going to press and hold that scroll button and drag the mouse. And in theory, we want to center the object, not the dimensions, okay? So I'm just kind of visually centering it based on my eye. And I would say somewhere in there looks pretty darn close. Now, what's important, Hawks, is if you happen to accidentally scroll, you'll lose the zoom to scale option. So we may have to go back and rescale it, and hopefully we'll come back into where we had things. Okay. If you're bothered by the fact that dimensions aren't centered on the page, you may initially want to center the whole thing with the dimensions. I generally, again, probably would suggest to try to center the object like we would on the piece of paper, and then the dimensions will kind of fit in around. So once you've got it centered and scaled, you'll want to click the model button to deselect that paper, model space zoom function. Something that some people do, Hawk, some people get zoomed way in and they double click. And what just happened here is I entered model space and they can't get out. But this tab down at the bottom now says model. If I click it, it says paper. I can now zoom out. So you can either double left click inside the viewport. That's what this green rectangle is called. It's called a viewport. You can either double click inside that viewport to activate it and double left click outside of it to deactivate it, or you can use the paper and model button. Okay, so do a quick Control S and do a save there. Last but not least, we've got to fill out the title block. Everybody's favorite part, which is lettering. Well, it's made much easier in AutoCAD. What you do is you go down to the title block down here, and I usually like to suggest that you kind of go over to one of the blue pieces of text, and you're going to double left click. And when you do that, you're going to get this box, and you can resize it if you so chose. And there are some questions here. Okay. And so the first question here is, what drawing number is this? Well, if I've got that question highlighted, I come down here to the value, and let's say this is my 5th drawing. So I'll type in 5. And by the way, Hawks, pretty much everything we do in technical drawing should have capitalized letters. So you can turn on your caps lock. So everything that you type will be all uppercase. So the next one is, what's the scale? Well, we did this at 1:1. That would be acceptable. And you can see on the right-hand side here, it's filling these in as I'm typing. Another acceptable statement for this particular drawing would be a full scale. However, I'm going to get in the habit, or suggest you get in the habit, of typing in whatever you're seeing down in that bottom right-hand corner when you scaled it. Okay, that'd be a good habit to get into. Today's date, well, I'm doing this today on the 8th of October of 2021, so 10/8/21. Let's see, the title of the drawing, this was our Inlaid Linoleum, Inlaid, if I can spell, Laid, Inoleum, Inlaid Linoleum, and last but not least, your name. If your whole name doesn't fit in there, first initial, full last name is what I would suggest. You'll see it's applied as I've been typing, but you got to make sure you say OK, and we'll now have a filled out title block. I bet you will all like that a lot more than lettering. Okay, quick save. Last but not least is printing. Okay, so we print from the A size sheet. You'll see there's a B size sheet. This is a 11/17. We might use this before the school year's out, but right now we're going to be printing on our A size page that we set up. So we're going to go up to the A, down to print. You will probably get this error. When I created this file, we had a different printer. It's just telling you that it doesn't exist. Just go ahead and say OK. And now we'll get to what they call plotting. When I was your age, we had a mechanical printer. It held pens and went around and kind of drew each line individually. So first one that we need to take care of is the name of the printer / plotter. Okay, for all of you, it may have changed by the time you see this video. I think it is this particular printer, but you may or may not see both. One of them will work and one of them will not. Okay, so I think it's this printer, but I could be wrong. Okay, you'll see now it changed the paper size to letter. I want to leave that there. Everything else down here hopefully will stay the same. Okay, so you shouldn't have to do anything with the layout. We shouldn't have to worry about centering or fitting the page. Probably should be needing to print more than one copy. It is already set to print in landscape, and that's the layout here. So the 11 inches is the long way. That's a landscape. The check marks here probably should be the same. We don't want to do anything there. The quality at normal is fine. What I would like you to double check, Hawks, is to make sure that you have this plot style set to monochrome. Okay, monochrome plot style should show all our lines as black. Okay, I do not want to see color unless you hear differently. Okay, so we want to make sure everything's set to monochrome plot style. Everything will be black and white. A good habit, Hawks, is to go down to this bottom left-hand corner once you've checked everything here and hit preview. And if everything is working okay, you'll see I'm going to see some differences here. Some of these lines are very thick. Other things are thinner. Again, this is kind of what we were looking to see as you were drawing on paper. If this all looks good, in the top left-hand corner, there is a little printer icon. If that looks good, you'd hit that print button, and it should be sent out to the printer in our classroom. If things don't look good, you would hit the close preview, and it will take you back to this window, and you either need to cancel out of here or make some changes, or you can certainly say okay here, and that will end up sending this off to the printer as well. Okay, Hawks? That should be it for our first information on how to do some dimensioning and how to print. Good luck on the Inlaid Linoleum. If you end up getting this handed back to you and there are corrections on it, making corrections in AutoCAD is quite easy. You would go back to model and erase things and redo them. So it'll always look as gorgeous as its first print here, not like when we were doing forward work. So good luck with that, Hawks, and see you on the next video.